Hi, I'm Marcia Alvey. I'm an out trans trial lawyer in Portland, Oregon.
Hello, Out Bosses. Rhodes Perry here, and welcome to this week's episode of The Out Entrepreneur, a weekly podcast where I get to interview today's most inspiring LGBTQ bosses crushing it in business. And on this week's episode, we are welcoming Marcia Alvey, who is joining us here in our studios live in Portland, Oregon. So Marcia, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
I am thrilled to have you. Thank you for making time. I know you're busy. Just a little bit about you for our audience before we jump into the questions. So Marcia is a solo practitioner representing injured people in personal injury, Oregon's workers' compensation cases, and Social Security disability cases. She holds a BA from Willamette University and a JD from Lewis and Clark. I always want to say Lois and Clark, like the show. She is a member of the Oregon Trans Law Caucus, Oregon Women's Lawyers, and the National Trans Law Bar Association. Her company, Alvey Law Group, has offices in Portland and Astoria. And when she's not busy with her practice, she is an active supporter and volunteer for Basic Rights Oregon. So awesome. Very, very thrilled to have you. Why don't we kick off the conversation with you sharing a little bit more about who you are as a business owner and what your business does? What's unique about your business?
Well, I'm a trial lawyer, so I represent people who have been injured through no fault of their own, usually. I represent them in administrative hearings, in trials, in Social Security disability hearings.
Yes.
And basically try to get them the benefits and the compensation or the damages that they're due under Oregon law. I've been doing that for 31 years, almost 32 coming up. And it's been my honor to represent folks who really need representation.
That's amazing. Really, really important work. I think you may be the first trial lawyer that we've had on the show, 110 interviews. So this is pretty cool.
Yay.
So is it common for most trial lawyers to have their own practices, or do they work for larger firms? So
it's a mix. I would say that on my side of the ledger, so primarily trial lawyers represent plaintiffs or people who've been injured, so the victims of other people's negligence or fault. And I would say on my side of the equation, as opposed to folks who work for insurance companies or for large corporations, we tend to be a little more individualistic, and you'll see a bigger variety of small firms or one or two person firms.
Yes.
On the other side of the equation, it's usually more oriented toward big firms.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And forgive me for my ignorance. I don't know much about trial law. This is really interesting to me. So it is a mix. Some people are employees of the bigger firms and some people are like yourself, solo practitioners. So for your journey, can you tell us a little bit more? Did you always run your own business or did you work for someone else at some point?
Sure. Me becoming a trial lawyer was basically by happenstance. I knew after my first year in law school that I wanted to do one thing, and that was to go back to my hometown, which was Coos Bay, Oregon, and work for the summer. So I blindly sent out resumes and cover letters to all of the different lawyers in Coos Bay and was hired by my eventual mentor, a guy named Mike Stebbins, and he trained me up as to how to be a trial lawyer. And from then on, I just took off from there. Right after law school, I went to work for a labor law and trial law firm by the name of Richardson, Murphy, and Lawrence. And there were two associates, so two younger lawyers working in that firm. And then that firm dissolved after about 6 months of me being there. And I moved to Astoria, where I worked for 4 years with another trial lawyer named Patrick Lavis. And then I moved back to Portland and worked with another fellow trial lawyer named Bill Skalak. And then so that's about 1995 or 96, I decided that it was time to go on my own. And so since August of 1996, I've been a solo practitioner.
So, and before you became a solo practitioner, how many years of experience were you gaining working for someone else?
Almost 10,
okay.
Not 9.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is that something that you see as a trend in your industry where folks will, if they start their own practices, that it's pretty standard that they would work for someone else for about a decade just to get enough knowledge of how the industry works before they jump off on their own?
Again, I would say it's varied in my side of the bar on the plaintiff side, which is what I do. I'm a plaintiff's lawyer, represent plaintiffs and injured workers, so claimants. On my side, it varies. I would say that the folks who can get hired, who can find jobs, will do what I did, which is kind of work for a firm for a while and gain experience and make connections and build a caseload, basically. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of younger folks who just can't find jobs.
Yeah.
And they throw up their shingles and go out on their own straight away. So, yeah, I'd say it's varied. I would say that there are more, generally, it's a generalization, that there are more folks who are just getting out of law school and unfortunately with a lot of debt and they can't find jobs. And so they are just throwing up their own shingles and having at it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I could imagine those numbers are probably a little bit higher now than maybe a decade or two ago.
Very definitely so.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the workplace is changing, as our listeners know. And so many of the folks who tune into this show have, obviously, they're thinking about starting on their own or they've already done it and can probably relate to just kind of that current climate of like.
I can tell you this, Rhodes. When I decided to come out and transition, it was scary as heck. Yeah. But I'd already had an experience that was similar to that, which was when I decided to go out on my own and open my own business, because it's very much the sensation of jumping off the high dive and hoping that there's water in the pool.
Yes.
Those two experiences were similar.
Yeah. We will definitely talk about that for sure more, because I agree with you 100%. And there's an article that I wrote a while back about how transitioning your gender can be very similar to stepping into the world of entrepreneurship. So I would love to talk more about some of those themes, but I have a feeling you're going to hit most of them. So before we go there, I do want to talk about two other things. The first is in your firm. So you're a solo practitioner. You work with other people all the time. So maybe this comes up more in working with clients or folks that you might outsource work to, but how do you create a workplace culture that is inclusive of folks that, like us, who are trans people, may feel like, whoa, I don't fit in here? Or is that important to you, one? And if so, how do you go about that?
It is important. I've only been out for going on 6 months at this point. And so, yay.
Congratulations.
So my staff was already in place. And so it was largely an education process with my current staff. As, guess what? You're going to have a trans woman boss starting July 23rd. And fortunately for me, they were wildly enthusiastic. I wouldn't say wildly enthusiastic. It took some adjustment.
Yeah.
But they're now all enthusiastic and very supportive of trans rights in particular.
That's amazing. And I mean, 6 months, I'm thinking about longer term relationships that I've had with family where you come out and it sometimes takes a decade or so, so for your team to come along that quickly.
They've come along. Impressive. It's a work in progress. I still, they have one of my employees who's my right-hand person has been with me for 20 years. So for her to get used to seeing Marcia and using my correct name and pronouns is sometimes a struggle for her, but it's getting really better.
Yeah. So that she basically is that family member, right? I mean,
she is.
2 decades. Yeah. And I mean, how much time do you spend at work? A lot of time together. Yeah. So that's definitely positive to hear that kind of transformation is possible. How, I'm curious in that, how did you prepare your team for the fact that you're transitioning on the job? What kind of supports did you give them that allowed them to go from 6 months ago, not knowing much, to now just kind of, okay, this is business as usual?
Well, I have 3 staff members. So I have 2 paralegals and then a front office person. And when it came time to transition, I took the main paralegal who's been with me for the one who's been with me the longest. They're all valuable, but the woman who's been with me the longest, she and I went to dinner. Mm-hmm. And you don't work with somebody as closely as we work together without noticing that there have been changes, So when we went to dinner and I had my coming out talk with her, she said, well, I'm glad you're telling me because I figured you were either trans or gay and I couldn't tell which one.
Yeah.
So I'd been on hormones for about a year at that point. So the physical changes were starting to be really noticeable.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And she's perceptive. And again, just like a family member, like something's happening here. And I feel like I'm not a part of the conversation. So you brought her in.
Right. And, the physical changes were getting to be pretty noticeable, pretty pronounced. But the emotional changes were also happening. And so I was much more, kind of all over the place emotionally in dealing with situations that were very common. Yeah. Dealing with opposing counsel, I found that my anger was getting peaked easier. Yeah. And that I was very much more emotional about most things. And that became noticeable to her too. So,
yeah. So In the work that you do, have you in the past, have you ever worked with someone who's trans in some of the cases that you've worked on? And if so, how did that kind of impact your practice?
I've maybe had, and I'm just guessing, 3 or 4 trans clients before I transitioned.
Yeah.
And I've known I've been trans since 1974, basically, where I could put a name to it. I always, but even before then, I was born in 1959. So I knew in the early 60s that something was off. Mm-hmm. And then in 74, I figured out the name for what was going on with me. So I've known for a long time. And so when I was representing those trans folks before I transitioned, it was hard to not just come out and say, oh, guess what? Me too. But I didn't do that.
Yeah. I could imagine that you do your best with all of your clients. I'm sure you gave it your all, regardless of the outcomes of working with those trans clients. So were other trans folks attracted to working with you because of the results that you got for other clients, or?
Not until I transitioned. Okay. Since I've transitioned, I've probably doubled the number of trans folks that I've worked for or with.
Wow.
Because people are starting to discover that I'm an out trans lawyer, and they just feel more comfortable. Huh. And so I've probably interacted with a half dozen trans folks in various stages of transition in different employment settings, many of whom are being horribly discriminated against in their places of employment, which lead them to filing claims for workers' compensation for the psychological and psychiatric benefits that are necessary because of the exposure to these horrible workplace exposures.
Yeah. You have such a vast network across Oregon State. So, your practice is incredible of what you've shared with me offline on this conversation. And I'm curious, because you are now you're visibly out as a trans woman. That's something that you share with your clients and with folks. You're involved with Basic Rights Oregon, which is the state's LGBT advocacy group. Are you now finding that other lawyers are seeking out your legal expertise in your area of expertise around how to support trans clients? Or is that something that you see yourself doing in the future? Because I know that this is still all very new, but I'm just curious.
I'm open to helping anybody who needs help, either interacting with or dealing with trans clients. Yeah. I've answered questions for people who are dealing with trans clients.
Yeah.
I have been a referral source. So if someone's being discriminated against in their place of employment, that gives rise to potentially a workers' compensation claim, but also an employment discrimination claim. So I'm working with the employment discrimination lawyers. They're dealing with the employment claim, and I'm dealing with the workers' comp claim. The facts that give rise to those two claims are the same set of facts. Right. And so we're working hand in glove, just in different arenas, to try to get this person benefits.
Yeah. And do you find that of the trans folks that you've worked with in the past, and now you're kind of doubling on working with those folks, there are certain trends that you see kind of happening again and again? If so, what are some of them?
The most frequent thing I see is horrible dead naming, misgendering, and a variant of that would be not allowing an employee to be who they are. And by that I mean, if they get asked by a customer in a store, are you trans? Or if someone misgenders the employee, I had one person whose employer forbade them from talking about their trans status. And so they just had to be mute in the face of this being dead named and harassed, basically. And that caused a lot of emotional distress and problems, and eventually led at least 2 of these folks to file workers' compensation claims.
Wow. And so you used a term, dead naming, which we both know. Not everyone who tunes into the show is a part of our Rainbow family. So could you just kind of describe what that is and how that shows up in the context of the workplace?
Right. Dead naming is using someone who's transitioned, using their name. In my instance, it would be my male name. And I think there's a distinction to be made between inadvertent dead naming. That would be someone you've known for a long time just making a slip. Yep. And when I think of dead naming, I think of it as being an intentional and volitional act, and where you intend to inflict harm by basically outing that person by using their prior name.
Yeah.
And causing harm thereby.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was a great definition, and I'm sure that will help a lot of folks. Sorry, I'm kind of hanging on to this piece of trans folks seeking you out, but I'm curious too around knowing your rights, right? And kind of what does it take for someone to get to the place where they're seeking legal counsel? Because there's probably so many instances that you and I can come up with of thinking about, dead naming that's intentionally happening to our friends who are working at an employer, yet they haven't taken that step to seek out legal counsel, even when they have either states' rights, like here in Oregon, or in Portland where we have city rights. But on top of that, the employer has their own policy, and yet they're still not taking that step forward for a variety of reasons. So
I think that the precipitating event that brings clients to my door and to my colleagues' doors would be something like, in a workers' comp setting, the need for psychiatric or medical care dealing with the stress or psychiatric responses to the dead naming or the outing or the discrimination. Generally speaking, in the employment arena, it's being fired.
Yeah.
And below those two events, seeking medical care or being fired, there's a whole large group of people who tolerate behaviors that are horrible for fear of losing their jobs, basically. The economic insecurity that comes with having to confront the bias and the ignorance and the hate.
Yeah. And I think that's the tricky piece, because I'm thinking of a friend recently. So now I'm asking for your legal counsel, but I just want to share this example because I think it's helpful for listeners just to kind of understand what you're saying, where this person is still employed, they're trans, and the employer had shared that his male colleagues were very uncomfortable with him using the restroom. He's using the men's restroom. And so he's asked him to basically walk out of the facility. It's almost like the movie Hidden Figures, but very different. But to walk out of the facility and probably for a half a mile use a facility outside that is still the men's restroom, but it's not on their property. And the supervisor's rationale was that people were uncomfortable. And I shared with him, he lives in a state where there are legal protections. There's lots of advocacy groups ready to, advocate for him. And he's like, I can't do that. I can't lose this job. So I'm going to basically do this every time I have to use the restroom, or I'm going to wait until the end of the day. And so I guess, I don't know, I'm sharing this, but my question, and maybe it's more hypothetical, or I don't know if there's an answer to it, but how do we help employers to understand that to do better, they have to know better? And They don't understand this piece. And I see this a lot in the work that I do with clients, where they have to shift their culture, and there's no motivation to do that until it gets to a place where you're in the court advocating for someone who's been fired because of an instance like this. And so, you're on the other side of it, but what would you say to an employer to kind of limit risk or, not get sued? What should they do?
I would say get educated. There are resources available to educate your workforce and to educate yourself regarding how to deal with trans folks and their needs. And in the instance of your friend, it's just tragic, because if you just think of the mechanics of using a restroom as a trans guy, there's nothing that any of his coworkers are going to see.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous, basically.
Right.
And as a result of that, I think if the employer just had a little backbone and some courage and said, this is the way it's going to be because of this, and this, and you guys just need to get over it. Or even said, look, the law in our state is I can't discriminate against this person. And by sending them a half a mile away to use the restroom is discriminating.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen here.
Right. Yeah. I think you're right. It's people's comfort, people's safety comes before people's comfort, right?
Right.
And also, like, to your point of education, it's leadership in terms of setting the tone. Even if it's uncomfortable for a leader, once they're educated, once they know better,
right,
then they have to do better, and they have to bring their team along with them.
But I think that's why, not to, pat you on the back, but podcasts like this are so important, because there are resources available for employers. And it's maybe this guy's employer didn't even know these resources were available, and there's folks like you who do trainings. Basic Rights Oregon does trainings, Trans 101 type settings to educate workforces. I was ready to have someone come in and educate my work staff. Yeah. Fortunately, I didn't need it because they readily adapted.
Yeah.
But those resources are available, and people should take advantage of them.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. So one more question on kind of your business side of what you do, just related to right now in the work that you're doing And especially, and maybe at the intersections of looking at more trans people coming to you for legal guidance, what has your heart singing right now of like why you're excited to do this work in this moment in time?
This is going to be kind of a long way of getting around to answer your question.
Sure. Yeah.
But I transitioned when I was 58 years old.
Yeah.
And I was pretty well established in the legal community in Portland and in Oregon generally. And so my options for transitioning and being stealth or flying under the radar didn't exist.
Yeah.
And so basically when I transitioned, I just resolved that the best thing that I could do was to show up, be out, be visible. The net result of that, I think, has helped to, I'm positive that a lot of my colleagues in the workers' comp arena and in a lot of settings, I've never met a trans person before. And so I think it's important to show up. And as a result of that, showing up, I think it will give folks who have been discriminated against or need legal services to reach out.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you have this platform, you have this power and this vast network, as you were talking about, where now no longer people can feign like, I've never met anyone trans, or we don't have trans people in Coos Bay, or, whatever
Right.
the excuses are.
And even though my legal niche is pretty specialized,
yeah.
I know people who know people. And so if the person contacts me and says, I need help with this area, I can say, that's not me, but I know folks who do that kind of thing. Let me help you get there.
Yeah. You're both an educator to your established colleagues and your hope for many trans and non-binary people who live in this state, if not, somewhere else in the country, which is amazing. And like one other thing that popped up for me in what you were saying, and I've shared the stat on the show before, 14% of people right now, this was the number in 2014, hopefully it's increased a little bit, in the United States say that they know someone who's trans or they work with someone who's trans. So there's still a long way to go. So like what you're saying, showing up, being who you are, being authentic and taking that risk. And you took a big risk. You had many, many, many clients. And we talked about this before you made the move to be public and to share who you are with the world. That was a huge risk. And can you just talk a little bit about that experience? Because I think that will give other trans folks, especially trans folks who are listening to the show, haven't come out, may have a lot of clients and may have fear around, I'm just going to lose everyone and my business is going to implode. What was that like for you?
Scary as heck. There was a lot of planning that went into that process, lots of planning and thought. And so we had a prepared letter that went out to every client about a week before, I want to say I flipped the switch, or I came out publicly on Facebook and social media and all over the place. So my current clients got a letter saying, this is, it's been a lifelong struggle of mine, but now I'm happy to live the rest of my life and represent you further as Marcia.
Yeah.
And then there was the big announcement on Facebook and to my colleagues I have 1 million email listservs that I'm a member of for the subspecialties that I deal with legally. Yeah. We sent notices to all of those. And then about a week later, we sent similar letters to all of the clients whose files had closed in the last 2 years. Mm. So at that point, everybody that I've interacted with, either currently for the last 2 years, was aware of the fact that I transitioned and that I was now working and living as Marcia. So that was one aspect of it. We had a very carefully planned out social media presence that we just decided to make. We retooled my website. So I took it from a male-oriented web presence to a more generally either non-binary or female feeling space. So when I say I flipped the switch, the website went live, the notices went out on all various social media platforms, the letters went out to my clients, and then we waited.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I have not lost a client.
That's amazing. And just for the show.
Hundreds.
Yeah. Hundreds of clients.
Yeah.
Not one client.
Not one.
Not one. And you're not just in Portland, Oregon. What's your reach across the state?
My practice is pretty well statewide. I don't go to the farthest reaches of, Burns or someplace in far southeastern Oregon, but I have a lot of clients up in the Pendleton, out I-84, out that direction, into Ontario and Baker City.
Yes.
I have clients in Vernonia. I have places in real rural parts of Oregon, and all of them were accepting.
Yeah. That, to me, that just gives me so much hope. And have you thought about I'm sure you've thought about writing a million books, but have you thought about creating some kind of resource for other entrepreneurs, business owners who are trans, non-binary, who have already established themselves before transitioning? Have you thought about like giving that information back in a way? Because you did this in such a thoughtful way. And I was there, at least on social media. When you flip the switch, I was like, yes, this is happening, this is real. But I mean, it was just so smart how you approached it. I think a lot of people could benefit from how you did it.
It's a matter of time. I would love to do it, but I've been really busy.
Yes.
But it's in the Corinne Hazard, who was my social media advisor, and the person who, it was my life. It was Corinne's plan. And so Corinne and I have thought about how to best do that. Mm-hmm. And we're hopefully going to have something this year where we can talk about, one idea is for her to talk about the mechanics of the plan. And then for me to like come in and say, this is how it affected me in my personal life and my professional mm-hmm. life, mm-hmm. and kind of lay out the steps that we took.
Yeah.
But it's really, it's more a work that we're talking about as opposed to anything that's been put in paper yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that whatever you put out, I think it absolutely can help business owners. I mean, I think it can help any professional, any trans, non-binary professional really consider, how do we do this? Because I mean, I'm thinking about employees who work for someone else. HR has their own process. A really good organization does it collaboratively, so to have something complementary that can really allow you to have a little bit of control of like, this is to me what will feel like I can do this, that I feel supported, and that we're going to do this in the best possible way.
The other piece is I know for a fact, because I've been to support group meetings, and in various different jurisdictions or places. And I know for a fact that there are closeted trans people who are living lives of mediocrity and who are not living to their true lives.
Yes.
And are not living as their true selves. And I think if the resources were there to say to them, look, this is not only doable, but here's a plan that will show you the steps that this trans person took. Modify them as you will, but don't be so afraid of making that leap. Even at later in life, I was 58 for crying out loud. So
yeah, there's such an advantage to that though, because I'm thinking like when I came out, my adult brain was not formed, right? So like to have like the foresight of this is the very intentional ways of doing this, and I mean you have lived experience. You're a lawyer. You have processes. And I feel like that could just help a lot. I don't know, maybe type A people like me who need to have a plan before doing something. That just feels like there's such a need for that. There could be such a big audience for it.
The planning is the way that I reduced my anxiety level.
Yeah.
Because when I thought, and Corinne and I put these pieces together and we tested them and bounced ideas off each other, and then eventually brought my staff into that process. The further refined those plans got, the lower my anxiety level got. Mm-hmm. And so when I jumped off the edge of the diving board and hoping that there's water in the pool, I was pretty assured there was going to be water in the pool. It's just a matter of how deep it was going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. This is good stuff. And we're going to take a quick sponsorship break. When we come back, we're going to talk more with Marcia. Hey, Outbosses. Rhodes Perry here. As you all know, part of my passion for this podcast is to empower you and fellow LGBT entrepreneurs to cultivate a feeling of purpose and belonging in your business. To know that you can show up and be the most authentic version of yourself. Purpose, belonging, and workplace culture are concepts I take seriously in my own consulting business. In fact, I'm on a mission to empower leaders just like you and those on their way to joining us to cultivate cultures of belonging. In my upcoming book, Belonging at Work, I share some of my personal struggles of coming out as a trans guy in the workplace and how I leverage this experience as one of my business superpowers. Now, I'm on a mission to support you in taking simple actions that will make a world of difference for anyone who has ever felt as if they needed to hide important aspects of themselves on the job. When you commit to purchasing a special, limited edition copy of the book, a portion of your purchase will support expanding workplace opportunities for fellow transgender and non-binary people. An added bonus, your story about what it means to belong at work will be featured on the book's website to inspire others. You're ready to belong at work now. To learn more, visit Rhodes on Amazon.com or text 444-999 and type the word belong. Again, that's Rhodes on Amazon.com or text 444-999 and type belong. Okay, Marcia, so we're going back into the interview, and I have some questions that I typically ask folks about being out in business. So I realize that this is new for you. So we've already talked about the fact that you haven't lost any clients. Has there been any other situation in which you've been working with folks, and maybe it's in the courts or something like that, where you may have thought twice of like, oh, this judge, like, I don't know if they're going to be cool, or, if something comes up for you, can you share with us, since you've transitioned, if there has been some kind of hardship of just taking that risk, being 100% out, and someone not being so supportive or welcoming? And in that example, can you share with us how you worked around it?
The coming out process with my clients also involved a very detailed coming out process with the judges in the forums that I regularly appear in front of.
Nice.
And so I primarily appear within a jurisdiction called the Oregon Workers' Compensation Board. And within the board, there are 5 board members appointed by the governor. And then there are a whole host of administrative law judges I appear in front of very, very frequently, sometimes multiple times during a week. In the Social Security arena, there's a chief judge, and then or a chief judge of the Portland office. And then underneath her, at this point, there are a whole host of administrative law judges. I made personal contact with the chief administrative law judge and the chairperson of the Oregon Workers' Compensation Board. I've known both of these women for years, so I had a coming out discussion with both of them. I sent them letters to be used when I came out for them to send to their colleagues. They're the judges underneath them. I had a lengthy conversation with the chief administrative law judge of the Social Security Administration, and she assured me that my transition would be smooth, and if I caught even a whiff of discrimination or being treated differently, that I was to inform her immediately and she would rectify it. I've had nothing but tremendous support from the areas where I practice frequently. The other place I practice not as frequently is Oregon Circuit Courts. I have not had a problem with a judge. Sometimes there are judges in counties where I'm appearing by telephone who misgender me occasionally because they hear my voice on the telephone as opposed to seeing me in person, which is, it's going to take some time.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, and I didn't realize this, when you're a lawyer in Oregon and you change your name with the Oregon State Bar, it's linked into the Oregon statewide court system. And so when I changed my name from X to Marcia, it changed it everywhere. And so I didn't have to go to every court that I appear in front of and make the change. It was seamless.
That's so good. I wonder if every state is like that. Probably not.
I don't know. I'm just, Oregon, we're very fortunate.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, to have that support from the chief judge, at least on the kind of the Social Security side, had to set the tone for so many other folks across the state. And again, just going back to how prepared you were when you were coming out. I mean, you dotted your I's, you crossed all your T's, you thought of everything, as much as you could anticipate. Yeah, as much as you could. So, I mean, it sounds like this is just like the ideal process of coming out. Maybe when we have you on the show a couple of years from now, and we can talk more about like what the experience has been like. But I am so thrilled that this has gone so well for you. This show is totally about empowerment, and we talk about our strengths all the time, about being a part of the Rainbow family. I'm curious for you as a business owner, and you were talking about this before, about how taking the leap of entrepreneurship is really similar to taking the leap of transitioning your gender. Very different things, and yet there's a lot of similarities. And so in that process, did you come to realize like, wow, there are superpowers, as hard as it is to be trans, at least like it's not hard to be ourselves, but it's hard to deal with the world and kind of lifting them up to our awareness to be on the same wavelength. But there are blessings to it as well. And so I'm curious for you, what are some of those blessings, I call them superpowers, that you leverage from your experience of being trans into your business, or vice versa?
I think the thing that comes most readily to mind is the feeling like I'm not having to filter who I am through a different persona.
Yes.
That I'm authentic, that what you're getting is the raw, unadulterated Marcia, as opposed to the facade, the male facade that I had to pack around with me for years and years and years. Not that I was an unhappy person, but there was a facade. There was a layer that was there that things had to get screened through and interpreted through that existence, even though at my core, I knew who I was.
Yeah.
And so the freedom, the ability to be authentic, the ability to not have to put on pretenses, to act like I'm somebody that I'm not, has been where that chief power is, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. And how does that help you in your business? Like when you're making decisions on where you want to go or how you're growing your business, how does that authenticity, knowing that you've already endured, this really hard thing, you've been embraced in an incredible way. How does that help make everyday business decisions? Whereas, think about prior to transitioning, you said you had this whole other layer that you were just kind of shielding yourself from the world, kind of compare and contrast those experiences as a business owner.
I think it's given me more entrepreneurial energy, I guess is the best way of putting it. I'm more enthused about living my life, about getting up in the morning, about conquering the world. And that's not to say that living life as a trans woman is not daunting at times. I mean, it takes a lot of courage some days for me just to walk out the front door. But once I do, it's just like, look out world kind of a thing. And the other way that it shows up is before I transitioned, there were periods of time when my gender dysphoria was so overpowering, just so incapacitating that my brain was just shutting down. I was not present for my clients. And I don't want to say, I was making mistakes, but I just was not as present as I should be. I wasn't listening hard.
Yeah.
I was listening, but I was paying attention. I was doing a good job, but I just didn't feel like I was as present as I should be. Yeah. And as my transition moved forward and the hormonal changes were happening, I discovered that I was listening on a whole new level, that I was empathizing with my clients much more than I used to as a male. And that I think I was a better lawyer as a result of that.
Yeah, I love that. I always think of it like when you're kind of managing the world and you're not out, or you're covering some aspect of who you are. It's like if you think of your brain like a computer, 25% of it is worried about something that's not the task at hand. And now it's just like you gain 25% of your brain to be like, I'm ready to help you. I'm ready to listen.
I've used a similar analogy with people, and this is a really bad analogy, but you kind of get the feel for it. It's like trying to operate Windows software in an Apple machine. Yeah. Maybe it'll work, or maybe the converse is using Apple in a Windows machine. Maybe you'll get some function out of it, but it's just not going to operate at its optimal level as opposed to using the correct software in the correct machine.
Yeah, I'm a total nerd, so that was great. A great analogy there for me. But yeah, no, that's really fascinating. This is good stuff. This is really good stuff. You've been embraced, so there hasn't really been like a major challenge other than the challenge of like, how the heck am I going to share with like my hundreds of clients that I'm transitioning? Like that to me seems like the big hurdle that you overcame. And the other side of it was people just hugged you. They embraced you, right? And this superpower of being authentic. What would you want our listeners to take away to inspire them to be more authentic in their work, whether they're in their business as entrepreneurs or they're still working for someone else?
Love yourself.
Yeah.
You're the only one of you that there is. Embrace yourself. Consider yourself worthy of living an authentic life. Don't hide yourself. The Gospels talk about hiding your light under a bushel. Just don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the thing that holds most people back is fear. And the thing that conquers fear is courage.
Yeah. And on that, so the fear component, right? There was so much fear. You said that you knew you had the word in 1974, and you've shared the story with me, which is an awesome story, and we're running out of time, so we'll have you back on the show and we can talk about that moment. That you knew for a really long time, and there was fear along the way of, for whatever reasons, that got you up until 58, and then that's when you said, you know what, fear, you're here. Like, what got you to get over that? Like, at that moment,
Just the being so tired of dealing with the dysphoria and living two lives. The pain of continuing in my current existence, the fear of changing was less a burden than continuing on the way that I was. There was like, it hit a sweet spot at some point, and things shifted.
Yeah.
And so I knew at a certain point that I was tired of living the way that I was. And so at that point, when things started, my mindset switched. And I started thinking, well, maybe transition is something that's viable. Then eventually it transitioned from, is it viable, to we're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to tell you that there were, like Monday I woke up and I said, this is it. But it didn't work that way. It was a very gradual process. And I also had a very skilled psychologist who helped me through a lot of this stuff, most of this stuff. And without her, I don't know that I'd be where I am. Yeah. She's really helped me work through a lot of stuff.
That's amazing. Yeah. And the other side, as scary as that fear, and fear is a part of our lives, right? But, the other side of it has been, it's amazing to see you today. And you're so present here right now. You're exuding just like Marcia, in all of the best ways that you can. So it just seems like
when I had a foot in each world, the fear was constant. I was always looking over my shoulder if I was presenting in a female way in public. I was constantly looking around and surveying and had my head on a swivel, trying to make sure that there was no one who would figure out who I was. Yeah. It just saps your energy. It's just draining. And after a while, you just say, time to move on.
Yeah. Yeah. And you did. You're here. Yeah. And you're thriving.
The other thing that kind of propelled me a little bit was, let me think, October of 2017. Mm-hmm. My very first college roommate, who was my roommate for a year and a half, died relatively suddenly of leukemia, or the after effects of leukemia treatment. And, he was 57. He just retired from being a state police officer. And I thought, Marcia, you know what? Time to get on with their life and live authentically, because you don't know how much longer you've got.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great motivator. It's just the reminder that for all of us, life is short and we have to live our best life, and you're doing that. With that, we're going to jump into the bonus round, where we'll have the chance to get to know Marcia just a little bit better, gain some insights on how we can bring our whole selves to work, and then learn one way to stay in touch with Marcia after our conversation. So Marcia, are you ready for the bonus round?
I can't wait.
Awesome.
I'm not sure what it is, but we'll find out, huh?
Yeah. So just if you can answer any of these questions in a word, phrase, or one sentence, you're going to knock it out of the park. Can you share with us a mantra or a quote that you reference that helps you stay motivated in your business, especially when things get tough?
I have a quote on my top of my computer monitor. Tell me, what is it you want to do with your one wild and crazy life?
Yes. I love that. I'm sure that probably changes every day, right?
Mary Oliver.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I didn't get the quote correct way, but that's what the gist of it.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's great. What are you most grateful for being a business owner who is also out as a trans woman?
That it's had no effect that I can discern on my practice.
Yeah. That's hugely very, very inspiring, just to hear that story. And I think that will give a lot of folks who tune in a lot of courage. So thank you for sharing that. So 2 more questions for you. Can you share one piece of advice to inspire the next generation of out bosses to take that first entrepreneurial leap?
My advice to someone wanting to make an entrepreneurial leap or a gender transition would be to plan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look at all the angles and figure out where your business comes from and what you're doing with it. And the thing that really helped me was to look at the previous year's track records of earnings and fees that I had generated. And then the question that I kept bumping my head up against was, what's going to be different after I become a sole practitioner or after I become an out trans woman than it was before? And the answer is probably not very much. If you take the fear aspects out of it and look at it rationally, those earnings, those clients are probably going to continue to come through the door, and they have.
Yeah, it's great advice. And I think on the planning piece, it would behoove people if you're listening and you're thinking about transitioning, or if you're thinking about starting a business, just seek out mentors like Marcia. And Marcia, you're busy, so I'm not going to volunteer you to be that mentor. Though I do want people to know where to reach you, if they do have legal questions or, anything that was brought up during the show today that resonated with them, if you would be open to share the best way to at least learn more about your business.
Absolutely. Probably the best way to do it is to go to my website, which is www.alveylawgroup.com, ALVEY lawgroup.com. And there's a contact sheet there that will get an email directly to me. If you have questions, you can learn about the firm by looking at the website. It's pretty comprehensive.
Awesome. So we will include that in the show notes for sure. It's been a pleasure having you here. It's gone by really fast. I feel like we can still be talking for a couple more hours. But thank you so much for just everything that you've shared, and you inspire me. So thank you. I really appreciate it. And for everyone who's listened today, thank you so much. For details from today's conversation, you can check those out at our show notes at outentrepreneur.com. You could also text OutBoss, all one word, to 444-999, and we could connect you directly with the show notes and lots of other information about the show. So as a next step, subscribe to the podcast, consider leaving a rating and review in iTunes, and be sure to share the show with a friend or a loved one. And for now, keep being your authentic selves 100% of the time.